Hi. It's become commonplace to criticize wars by deriding them as forever wars. There was talk of George Bush's forever wars and Obama's forever wars and now Netanyahu's forever wars. Afghanistan was a forever war. Iraq was a forever war. Now Gaza's a forever war. MAGA people like talking about how they're opposed to the U.S. getting into more forever wars in the Middle East. The underlying assumption here is that forever wars are, by definition, bad. But is that true? I want to answer that question in this video. My name is Michael Shurkin, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Pax Americana, a conversation about world affairs, global conflict, military strategy, and anything else that happens to be on my mind. And for those of you who subscribe to the written version of my newsletter, also called Pax Americana, this should be familiar to you because I already published this as a newsletter, but I thought it would be worth doing it as a video as well. The term forever war, as used in this way, comes, I believe, from the title of Joe Haldeman's fantastic 1974 science fiction novel called Forever War, which was about a soldier who was fighting an interstellar war against some sort of alien species. And the war seemed to last forever, kind of last forever, because of the enormous distances involved in fighting aliens that are different parts of the galaxy and the relativistic effects of near speed of light travel. So the soldier might deploy for a few years, but centuries transpire back on Earth, which causes all sorts of problems when he returns back home and discovers that, his family is long since dead and Earth is now 200 years later, something like that, and everything's changed. So there's also a dislocation between the soldier and human society, etc. Anyways, the book, at a certain level, was an analogy about the Vietnam War. I mean, it's not about Vietnam, but it's also not about Vietnam either. Haldeman himself, he served in the war. He was drafted in 1967. He fought as a combat engineer in 1968. He got a Purple Heart. And he acknowledged that it was the wartime experience that launched him on his writing career. He had intended to become a physicist. He was a physics major. And he famously wrote, "In my work, it always comes back to the jungle," meaning at some level, it's an analogy for Vietnam, particularly this idea that it's a sort of never-ending train wreck. And also he's really concerned about sort of the dislocation that he felt as a returning soldier back in civil society, etc. Moving on. So resistance to the idea of forever wars, I think, is grounded in the belief, which I do share, that wars should be conducted in pursuit of clearly articulated and achievable policy goals. You identify a thing that needs to be done, that can best be done through military force. You figure out how military force will actually enable you to achieve this goal, which means that the goal has to be achievable through military force. And then you go and you do that thing. So you seize that thing. You compel an adversary to do something, or you compel the adversary to stop doing something. This could take many years, but the point is that you have an achievable end in sight and you have clear objectives, and then when you reach those objectives, you're done. Perhaps the greatest contemporary example of this is the 1991 Persian Gulf War, where George Herbert Walker Bush had set these basic objectives in terms of like kicking the Iraqis out of Kuwait and ending the threat to Saudi Arabia. He achieved the objectives, and then he stopped. He said, okay, we're done. The war's over. And it's great. And this is great. And I think most of us would agree that that's pretty much how war should be fought. And it was a wonderful antidote as a follow-up to the Vietnam War. Like, oh my God, finally like a clear war with clear objectives, militarily achievable objectives. And we did it, and we called a halt, and we're done. Wonderful. Similarly, war must always only be just a means to an end, right? It should never be an end to itself. Sometimes wars that go on, or at least appear to do so, because there's no clear policy, or the policy goal is unachievable, which is a bad thing. Sometimes wars go on because their perpetuation serves the political or even the financial interests of some or all of the people involved. Many people argue that the reason why the United States is often involved in so many conflicts is because American foreign policy is driven by the defense industry and all the defense contractors that are making mint off of conflict, right? I don't think it's true at all, but this is something that people actually say. But if it were true, if it's true, for instance, that Netanyahu is just continuing the Gaza war because he wants to stay out of jail, that's a monstrous thing. And I don't want to debate whether he is or isn't. That's not the point of this video. But that would be a monstrous thing, right? We can all agree on that too. But what I want to ask is, might a never-ending war be a good thing, or more precisely, a least bad option? War is never a good thing, but maybe it's better than the option. So maybe as a policy choice, the perpetuation of the war could actually be the end that you're hoping to achieve. The example of this being true, or possibly true, that first comes to mind is the Afghanistan war. That war, after more than 2 decades, had absolutely no end in sight, and and it seemed pointless. We were getting nowhere because maybe the objectives that we had imagined were unachievable. But it also seemed to be the case that the United States could have kept the war going on seemingly indefinitely at low cost to ourselves, and thereby prevented the Taliban from returning to power indefinitely, or at least keeping them from the major population centers of Afghanistan. After all, in the last few years of the war, most of the fighting was being done by the Afghans themselves, so not that many Americans were getting killed. The expense was relatively low, in the grand scheme of things. Had the U.S. chosen to keep maintaining this war effort, millions of Afghans today would be much better off than they are now. Now, admittedly, it's hard to argue. It's not clear if this is a good thing for the United States, right? So the return of the Taliban to power, that certainly sucks for Afghans, but does it matter for us? It's debatable. Some people say, yeah, that this is bad for us. So admittedly, some, for instance, evoke the reputational damage to the United States, the damage done by abandoning an ally and capitulating to an enemy. And lots of people on the right like to attack Biden for this, even though it was Trump who set it up. But whatever, they used to attack Biden for this. This showed weakness. This is bad. This encouraged Putin. This did that. Maybe, all debatable. But then there's some people point to the persistent terrorist threat represented by the Taliban, whose close relationship with al-Qaeda is what got us into the war in the first place. All of this is debatable, but the fact that it is debatable underscores my point, that keeping the war going might not have been the worst option. War is bad, we all agree, but so are the Taliban. Otherwise, why would we be fighting them in the first place? Presently, in fact, the United States is involved in a forever war in a place that I'm sure very few of you ever think about, Somalia. We are fighting a forever war against a terrorist Islamist group called Al-Shabaab. The war has been going on at least as far back as 2007, arguably earlier, depending on the definitions and what you call American counterterrorism operations against Somalia, and also the whole history of Al-Shabaab and its predecessor, the Islamic courts, etc. But it's been going on for a very long time, and nobody really talks about it anymore. I think that one of the reasons why people don't talk about it and why nobody's debating it or going on and on about the forever war in Somalia is the fact that the U.S. has managed to keep stirring the pot at relatively low cost in terms of lives and treasure. We can maintain this war seemingly forever at very low cost to ourselves, and that's what we've been doing. One thing that's interesting about this war is that nobody who follows it at all, at least nobody as far as I know, pretends that it's going to end anytime soon, if ever. Somalia's federal government is weak. It lacks the strength ever to win, even with its international supporters, which includes the U.S., but also Ethiopia, and the Turks are there, and lots of countries are contributing to this whole multinational coalition that is there on the ground helping the Somali government. But, and this is interesting, nobody is interested, none of the people helping the Somali federal government cares enough about this war to try to give the Somali federal government the resources required to plausibly required to win the war. It's debatable even if we can. I mean, look at all the money we threw at Afghanistan and still, well, we know how that ended. So maybe it wouldn't matter if we spent billions of dollars on the Somali federal government to crush al-Shabaab. But either way, nobody's interested in trying. Nobody cares enough. And what we are doing enough to guarantee that al-Shabaab itself can never win. So the Somali government can't win because we don't care enough to help it, to enable it to win. Al-Shabaab can't win because we keep helping the federal government to at least stay alive. So we are all helping, we are all contributing to a stalemate. And it seems like there's a consensus in the international community that this stalemate is really ultimately in our interest, given that we don't care enough to try to enable the Somali national government to win. So the bottom line is the U.S. policymakers have basically concluded that when you look at Somalia, the best option, the best choice, is a forever war that we can maintain seemingly indefinitely at relatively low cost to itself. Wars are bad when they continue because one has lost one's way, one is adrift. And it goes without saying that if a war is perpetuated for the sake of any personal interest, either financial or political, that of course is absolutely monstrous. But also the fact that some people might benefit politically or financially from war doesn't necessarily mean that that's why the war is going on forever. It just happens to be incidental, the same way that it was incidental that American manufacturers made an enormous amount of money supplying the U.S. military during World War II. I guess my real point here is that this label forever war is kind of silly and shouldn't be bandied about the way it is, because a forever war is not, by definition, a bad thing. A forever war might actually be the best option. The question that needs to be asked is, why is it that the war has no end in sight? Is it because of a lack of policy? Is it because the objectives are not achievable and you need to rethink this? Like, we can't win, so maybe we should stop. Or is it because of some sort of insidious motives like personal interest? Or can it be argued that carrying on a conflict seemingly indefinitely might actually be, all things considered, the best option? If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. And if you're so inspired, feel free to throw some money my way by hitting the thanks button. Also, you can buy me a coffee, and I put a link to buy me a coffee below in the description. Also, in the description, I put links to my social media accounts, LinkedIn, Twitter, Blue Sky. And of course, there's my written newsletter, my Pax Americana, for which I write weekly. There's a link to that. And last but not least, there is my own website, michaelshirkin.com. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye-bye.